Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Current, the North Central Region Water Network's Speed Networking webinar series. The network is an extension-led collaboration among land-grant universities in 12 upper Midwestern states. I'm Rebecca Power, and I will be your moderator for the day. Well, it's been raining a lot in my part of the Midwest, and I suspect it's the same for many of you. So agricultural drainage is a timely topic for us. We are fortunate to have some of the world's foremost experts in managing drainage water in agricultural landscapes presenting today on what we know about managing agricultural drainage and some of the new ways of communicating that research. So hopefully it will be used by a greater number of people that could benefit from it. This session will be recorded and available at northcentralwater.org and learn.extension.org after today's live presentation. What we're going to do is we're going to go through all three of our presenters, and for those of you participating with us, you can submit your questions for presenters in the chat box, which should be at the lower left-hand portion of your screen. There will be a dedicated question and answer session after everybody's done. So we'll be collecting those questions and presenting them for the presenters to answer at around the 2:30, 2:35 mark, somewhere in there. And a phone-in option can be accessed by clicking on the telephone handset icon located in the upper left-hand area of the screen if you're having problems with the audio. Today's presenters, Laura Christianson from the University of Illinois, and her title is Choose Your Own Adventure, New Materials, Describe 10 Conservation Drainage Practices. And then we have Jane Frankenberger from Purdue University, Transforming Drainage Through a Collaborative Research, Extension, and Stakeholder Network. And then finally, Chris Hay from the Iowa Soybean Association, formerly South Dakota State University. Have to get that plug in for SDSU there. And his topic is Advancing Conservation Drainage in Iowa. So we'll start with Laura, and she is an assistant professor of water quality in the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois and leads the Illinois Drainage Research and Outreach Program. So with that, we'll give it over to Laura and take it away, Laura.
Okay, I turned my microphone on, and I assume you can hear me?
You're good.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Thanks, Rebecca, for that good introduction. You're right, it's always timely to talk about tile drainage. So we're excited to present here today in the webinar. We'll get straight into it. I'd first like to point out one of the main funders for our project was and is the North Central Region Water Network. And so we're all excited to be presenting in the Water Network's webinar today. And true to the nature of the Water Network, the project I'll be talking about over the next 10 minutes is a regional collaboration with myself from the University of Illinois, Dr. Jane Frankenberger from Purdue, Dr. Chris Hay with the Iowa Soybean Association, Dr. Matt Homers with Iowa State, and Dr. Gary Sands with the University of Minnesota. So many of us know that artificial subsurface drainage is integral to crop productivity in many parts of the North Central region. And we have a long history of this tile drainage because it improves crop growth and improves trafficability, and in doing so, really improves crop yield and reduces risk for our producers. However, we also know that tile drainage changes the natural hydrology, and in doing so serves as a pathway or a conduit for nutrients to move from our fields where we want them to downstream waters where we don't necessarily want them. And those nutrients can cause impacts like we all know the Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone, where nitrate and tile drains moving through the Midwest, tile drains in the Midwest is one of the biggest factors leading to this seasonal hypoxic zone. But then clean water also matters closer to home too. We're all familiar with the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit, which was recently dismissed in the court. And even though this lawsuit was dismissed, the issues of clean water are still very relevant. Having clean water locally for drinking water and fishing and swimming are all issues that still very much matter for us in our own backyard. And so this is where our project comes in, and this is the project I wanted to talk to you about today. Our group of regional collaborators has developed a package of educational material to share information about 10 ways to reduce nitrogen loads from drained cropland in the Midwest. We have 2 products in our kind of educational material, 2 products that are available right now. And the first one is a 44-page booklet describing the 10 ways or the 10 practices. And the second product is 2 versions of PowerPoint slide sets. And we want to talk about both of those today, but I also want to mention we have a couple other materials in development, a short summary fact sheet, and then an online training module that'll describe the 10 ways, which we eventually envision will be made available for certified crop advisor continuing education credits. So starting with the booklet, which is available right now, the booklet describes 10 ways or 10 practices to reduce nitrate loads in tile drains. And we divided the 10 practices into 3 different categories. The first category is in-field practices that are cropping or management strategies. These include things like improved nitrogen management, aka 4Rs nitrogen management, winter cover crops, and then perennials in the cropping system. An example of perennials in the cropping system is practices like a perennial bioenergy crop, or including a perennial in an extended rotation, for example, a couple years of alfalfa in a corn or corn soybean rotation. The next set of practices are the in-field practices that are actually modifications of the drainage system. These include things like drainage water management, which is also known as controlled drainage, the practice of reduced drainage intensity, which is placing your drain tiles either shallower in the soil, so closer to the soil surface, or placing those drain tiles wider apart in your field. And then the last one there is recycling drainage water. And this is the practice where you store some of your drainage water on site, and then you reuse that water during drier parts of the year through an irrigation system. Now the last set of practices are the edge of field practices, and these include things like wood chip bioreactors, constructed wetlands, alternative ditch design, which is another way to say a 2-stage ditch, and saturated buffers. Now the novel thing about the booklet is that for each of the 10 practices, we describe them in a consistent format. Each practice is described in either 2 or 3 pages in the booklet, and I'm showing an example here for wood chip bioreactors. Each practice has an illustration, and then we go through some of the standard questions for each of the practices. For example, what is the practice? How does the practice improve water quality? How effective is the practice for improving water quality? Where does the practice work? What's the level of acceptance for each practice? And then are there questions and opportunities in terms of research about the practice that we're still trying to figure out? And I also want to spend just a couple minutes on the PowerPoint slide sets that are available. The PowerPoint slide sets pair really perfectly with the booklet, again, to be kind of an educational course materials package. We have 2 PowerPoint slide sets available. The first one is a little bit simpler version. It's a linear, kind of click straight through version where we have about 4 to 6 slides for each of the 10 practices. And this is very easy to edit if you're interested in presenting on just 4 of the 10 practices. It's easy to take slides out or add new slides in if you have additional content that you'd like to add. And then the second version of the PowerPoint slide deck is a non-linear version, where the slides are hyperlinked together. Now this version allows you to have a little bit more interaction with your audience. It allows them to choose the practices that you talk about. Out of all of the 10 practices, they can choose the practices that they're most interested to talk about, so they can, as you see, choose their own adventure. And I want to show you how these hyperlinked slides work. So in a situation where you're presenting these 10 ways to an audience, the audience would have the booklet in front of them, and so they would be able to see the full decision map, which we saw on the slide a couple slides ago. and then you would ask, what are the practices that you want to talk about? And someone might say, well, I'm most interested in edge of field practices. And so you click on that edge of field part of the slide, actually directly in the PowerPoint. You click on that, and it populates the decision map for you. And then maybe someone says, okay, I'm most interested in bioreactors. Now clicking there takes you directly to the set of 4 to 6 slides on wood chip bioreactors. And as I mentioned, the slides pair perfectly with the booklet. We go through the same set of questions that's addressed in the booklet. What is the practice? Well, a wood chip bioreactor is a trench filled with wood chips that you route your tile drainage through. And in that trench, the wood chips are colonized by natural bacteria that are able to convert the nitrate in the water to nitrogen gas. So just clicking through the slides, again, you see the same questions as in the booklet. How does the practice reduce in-loss and drainage? Well, adding the additional carbon in the wood chips for this practice superpowers or enhances the natural process of denitrification. So at the end of each set of slides for each practice, and I'm showing you an abbreviated version here, you're always coming back to the decision map. So maybe the next person in your audience wants to talk about in-field practices that modify the drainage system. So again, you just click on the right parts of the slide and it takes you to the right set of practices. For example, drainage water management in this case. Now here's the question, the million-dollar question, most important part of my presentation: where can you get these materials? You're going to want to go to this link that I'm showing here, go.aces.illinois.edu/10ways. Now if you scroll up in the chat box, we've typed that link in a couple places in the chat box so you can just copy it right out of the chat box since you can't copy it off the side. That link will take you to the web page that I'm showing here with a screenshot. In order to access the booklet, an electronic copy of the booklet is available right here at this link, that top orange link. That takes you to a PDF of the 44-page booklet. Now that's a lot to print out. So if you're interested in printed copies of the booklet, you can order them through our Illinois Extension warehouse using that second link. Now there is a small shipping and handling fee for printed copies from the warehouse. So if you happen to be in one of the north central states, you can feel free to contact one of us on the project team, and we all have copies for distribution of the booklet in our own states. So if you're in Illinois, I'm your contact person. Indiana, Jane Frankenberger is your contact. If you're in Iowa, Dr. Chris Hay or Dr. Matt Homers. And if you're in Minnesota, Dr. Gary Sands is your contact person. And if you're not in one of those states, go ahead and contact me if you're interested in printed copies of the booklet. We also talked about the PowerPoint slide sets that are available. And if you scroll to the bottom of that same web page, that go.aces web page, scroll to the bottom, and you're going to want to click that bottom link to complete a Google form that allows you access to the slide set. Now the Google form, it's just a really simple thing, just allows us to get your name and your job title so that we can track who's accessing the slides, and at the end of our project we can have a better idea of how to assess the impact of the entire project. So with that, I'll throw out the acknowledgments for our publication, and my 10 minutes are up, so I think we'll hand it back to Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Laura. And we will now go on to Jane Frankenberger, our next presenter. And as I put in the chat box, so for those of you that are participating with us, if you have questions, please submit them in the chat box, and we will gather them for after our speakers are finished. So Jane Frankenberger is a professor of agricultural and biological engineering at Purdue University, where she focuses on water management and water quality in drained agricultural watersheds. And it's worth noting that she also leads the Indiana Watershed Leadership Academy, so has a wide range of interest and experience related to water resource management. So thank you so much, Jane.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to be here to talk about our project and especially a network of people that's working to transform drainage. So our network includes researchers, extension specialists, and the drainage industry, and lots of others that we're calling stakeholders in this title. And we're conducting many different activities to advance drainage practices. Okay, so first of all, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with what parts of the North Central region are drained, so I wanted to start with the map with one of the best estimates available. The dark blue areas show places, the counties where more than 50% of the area is estimated to be drained, and that percentage is growing everywhere, it's important to know. Some of the fastest growing areas are in the northwest of the region, northern Minnesota and North Dakota, and the Red River Valley is that didn't have drainage until recently are moving very quickly towards being highly drained, just like the rest of the Corn Belt. So it's really a situation that touches almost all of us in the North Central region. So I wanted to start by talking about the two issues. I knew Laura Christianson would talk about this a little bit, but just to say that this is how we usually present what we're trying to solve. So the first is excess nutrients. We've known for a long time that tile drains greatly increase the loss of nitrate, and a more recent realization is that they're also a primary pathway for phosphorus. So in areas where we care about a lake like Lake Erie, we really need to address tile nutrients. So that's the first issue. The second is that even in the very well-watered North Central region, where excess is usually a bigger problem than water deficits, we do have limitations on crop yield due to water deficit in many years. It might be 1 out of 5 years, it might be 4 out of 5 years, depending on where you are, but there are limitations. So now, is this going to improve in the future? Unfortunately, it is not. If we don't do anything, both of these concerns are likely to get worse, not better. Our region is projected to have wetter winters and spring periods, which is when the tile flows, and that will increase the nutrient losses. And our growing seasons are likely to become drier, not because we're going to have less rainfall, but because the warmer temperatures will increase plant transpiration, and also because the rainfall will become more flashy, meaning that it falls in more extreme events rather than gentle rains that replenish soil moisture. Okay, so that's the two issues, and so the question is, what can we do about them? Well, there's one type of solution that addresses both of these, which is the idea of storing more water in a landscape. So I'm trying my new analogy of thinking of it as like a battery that stores power when we have enough of it for times when we don't have enough. In the same way, in the times when we have plenty of drainage, gosh, can you hear me okay? Window just came up. Okay, I hope someone will speak up if you can't hear me. It said it's connecting.
You're fine, Jane. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, this window said it's connecting, so that was scary. Okay, so we need to think about how we can store water, and that's the purpose of our project and our network that I'm talking about, which is transformingdrainage.org. So we're not saying that this will be easy or that it will be inexpensive, because it certainly won't, but we think we need to be collecting data and be thinking about this and bringing up the vision and provide some possible paths forward towards a vision of a transformed drained landscape. Okay, Dr. Laura Christianson just talked about 10 ways to reduce nitrate, and that's a great name because it makes it clear there are choices. There aren't just, there's not just one way that you can reduce nitrate, but at the same time, they're not unlimited choices. There's not 100, so there's around 10. The project and network that I'm talking about are focusing on the practices that store water, which is just 3 of them. So I'm going to talk through those practices briefly and then talk about the activities that we're doing and our network. Okay, the first practice is called controlled drainage, and it stores water in the soil. I'm going to illustrate all of them by a profile like this where you can see, I'm going to try this. Oh, did that wrong. Okay, but there is lateral drains, and then there are main drains that come down. That's what I meant to do. All right, the drains, and it drains out into a ditch, right? So in controlled drainage, we install water control structures that are kind of like, am I still here?
Yeah, Jane, you're fine.
Okay.
I'm uncertain what that message is, but we're managing it.
It
so
keeps coming up
ahead.
and saying connection failed. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So the water control structures function like dams, and they raise the water table, so as you can hopefully see here, the soil becomes more saturated, and that allows us to release less water into the drainage ditch and possibly provide more water for the crops. The second practice is a saturated buffer, and here this stores water in the buffer. Again, we have the main drain coming and a water control structure. This time the purpose is to distribute the water into a distribution line along the buffer where it can seep out into the buffer soil, and as long as there's plenty of carbon, denitrification will take place, as Laura just explained, which allows the nitrate to become harmless N2 gas. The third practice, which has the highest potential but also unfortunately the highest capital investment cost, is called drainage water recycling. And in this practice, the drain flows into a pond rather than into a stream or to a ditch. As you can see here, the pond holds the water, and now it doesn't matter what the concentration of nitrate is in the pond, because it's going to go back through the irrigation system back onto the crop where it is helpful rather than harmful, where the nitrate can be helpful rather than harmful. So in this picture, the irrigation system is a center pivot system. It can also be a sub-irrigation system, as is shown here, where we have the same pond, but now the pump is pumping water back into this water control structure where it is distributed into the soil so that the nutrients and water can be used by the crop through the sub-irrigation system. So I just wanted to say that the drainage water recycling can be used with any kind of an irrigation system. It doesn't imply any particular kind. So there's a lot of more considerations. This is obviously a very complex system. We've just finished an extension publication that describes this practice and provides some of the information on it, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Okay, so Transforming Drainage is funded by USDA NIFA, and so I'm just going to go quickly through some of the things that we do. First of all, there's field research at 35 sites, and I'll come back to that. We're working on synthesis across the region. Decision support tools are just starting to be developed, so I won't be talking about those today. And then, of course, we have extension and education. And the blue box around the outside signifies the network, which we think is so important that I really did want to focus on today, that in order to transform drainage, we need far more than just a few of us. So we've got a much more extensive network that's active here that I'll tell you about. So first of all, the field research. We have 35 sites where one of these three practices has been or is being monitored, which is really quite fantastic. I hope you agree with that. This diagram shows some of them and hopefully gives a feel for how they're in a way connected, even though each one represents really its own research project. I'm just going to highlight a few chosen fairly randomly to give you a sense of what's being researched. So at Fairmount, researcher Xinhua Jia is comparing controlled drainage and free drainage. At Bear Creek in Iowa, researcher Dan James with USDA ARS is researching saturated buffers and have found an average reduction of 220 pounds of nitrate N per year. We have a couple sites where drainage water recycling has been researched. In Ohio, researchers found an average yield benefit of 19% for corn. And at a site in Missouri with an interesting name, which is Muds, the corn yield increased over 20 bushels per acre with drainage water recycling. So we have a lot more details on all these sites on the website that I'll get to in a minute. But for example, just showing the Missouri site here as an example of how much is going on at each of these individual sites, and they obviously benefit from a long research history. It's been a very productive research site that's taught us a lot, and so it's part of the network and adds so much. Okay, so we'll be synthesizing the results and extending it to the entire period and into the future through modeling so that we can provide regional recommendations. But I want to talk about the team and really explain what the network is, so hopefully you'll think about being part of it. The core project team represents 8 states, as you can see here, and here are the people. We include agricultural engineers, soil scientists, an economist, and others. But talented as this team is, we need collaborators who share the vision of the project and contribute to the project in a lot of ways. They also add 2 more states that are very important in the drainage world. And some of them have collected data that are used, some work in synthesis, and some in extension. So that's a very important part of the network. But in order to transform drainage, we need more people involved. So we have an advisory committee that doesn't extend it geographically, but extends the type of people that are involved, the agencies and sectors that have key roles in drainage decision making. It includes contractors, farmers, NRCS, researchers, Fish and Wildlife Service, and many others. And the next step out on the drainage network is what I'm calling the interested drainage community. And what does that mean? So it means people who are interested. So hopefully it means you, because you're on this webinar, so you must be at least somewhat interested in thinking about how we can change drainage and make it more resilient and sustainable. Most of the other people are probably something on this list. It would include agencies, drainage contractors, producers, the drainage industry, the manufacturers, and anyone else. So hopefully you see yourself there and can consider yourself part of the network. But that's still not the entire extent of the network. We need to go beyond to people that I'm calling everyone else. I didn't want to call them uninterested. All of us need to reach out to all these folks, and altogether then this is the network that we're calling the Transforming Drainage Network as the title head. So I'm going to close with talking a little bit about the kind of activities that we do. There's a lot of extension and engagement going on. First of all, there's the website, links to all kinds of information. Another example is field days that team members are doing throughout the region. There's all kinds of field days going on. And we're excited about a brand new extension publication that just came out in the last few weeks that you can get from the website or elsewhere that answers many of the questions about drainage water recycling. And before I end it, I wanted to talk about how others in the network are also contributing so much. For example, the private sector, one of our advisory committee members, Bob Clark at Contractors, wrote up a column in the Drainage Contractor magazine, and we followed up with several more articles by Ben Reinhardt, the project manager. The industry, the drainage industry, is really taking the lead with saturated buffers. And Iowa Soybean Association is a great example of a commodity group that's doing so much. And you'll be hearing in just a minute from Chris Hay, so I won't say any more now, but this is just a quick preview of that. So to close, our vision is that drainage will be transformed so that the nitrate and phosphorus that we know is leaving our soils through the tile drain network can be retained or stored and even recycled, so it goes back on to the fields where it can be used rather than causing problems downstream. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane, so much. And we'll use your cue and get right to Chris Hay. So Chris Hay is now the Senior Environmental Scientist at Iowa Soybean Association, and he is responsible for providing technical assistance to field experiments, leading other scientific research efforts, and overseeing their certified water quality lab. So with that, Chris, go ahead.
All right, thanks Rebecca, and appreciate the opportunity. And so with my time here, wanted to give you a quick overview of who we are, and then focus in on a lot of what our efforts are around these conservation drainage practices, trying to advance them in Iowa. And then again, hope that those examples trigger some ideas, or at least reinforce some ideas, and ideally maybe give you some ideas of particularly those of you in Extension, how you might be able to partner with commodity groups or others on some of these ideas. Obviously partnerships are a big part of that, and so our work with our partnership with Transforming Drainage and the 10 Ways project are key parts of our work around conservation drainage, and obviously Iowa State University Extension Outreach is a key partner for us, and we hope those groups would also say the reverse is true. So again, with that quick background, just a quick overview of who we are. We're governed by a board of 22 farmer directors. We've got 71 folks on staff here at Iowa Soybean Association, working for 11,000 members across the state, then representing 40,000 soybean farmers that contribute to the soybean checkoff. One of the largest group, or I should say then the overall goal statement for the Iowa Soybean Association is we're about continuously improving the competitiveness of Iowa soybean farmers. And the largest group within Iowa Soybean is ISA Research, and looks like we got a little problem on the slide there, but that ISA Research is really made up of 3 teams. So that first team there that is a little scrambled is our on-farm network, really focused around the agronomic issues of soybean production. The environmental programs and services that I'm a part of, focused around environmental quality, and then the analytics group that focuses on managing and getting value out of the data that we collect. And so within that larger goal statement of increasing competitiveness, there's 3 objectives that we focus on within ISA Research. So the first one of those is improving productivity. We also focus on improving efficiency and profitability, but then also a key part of that, and a key part of what we think makes our farmers competitive or increases competitiveness is focusing on improving natural resource management and environmental quality. So all 3 of those objectives are important objectives to us in ISA Research. Just to give you an idea of our footprint, this is a project map from the last 15 years, and so each one of these points represents a point of engagement for ISA Research, whether that's on-farm replicated strip trials, whether that's edge-of-field practices like bioreactors or saturated buffers, watershed planning, and again, all the different realm of projects that we've got going on within Iowa Soybean. Overall, this represents about a $50 million investment over those 15 years. About 30% of that comes from checkoff funds, but then we leverage those checkoff funds with other funding partners, other funding sources to get this complete package of practices and projects that we've got out there. Then a large part of our work in the recent years now is really focused around trying to meet the goals and advance the goals of the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, getting at some of those goals in the hypoxic task force that Laura mentioned, as far as trying to reduce impacts on the hypoxic zone, but then also addressing concerns about local and regional water quality issues. And so this is just an infographic kind of summarizing some of our efforts around the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy within the last reporting period. And so you can see a number of activities there, and certainly education and outreach is a key component of that. So a lot of effort around trying to educate our producers and the public and others on these practices, and then focusing in on conservation drainage in particular. We're heavily invested in conservation drainage. Our board recognizes it as a key part for us to be involved in, and we actually have policy developed around conservation drainage. And really, again, we think that fits nicely with our objectives because it fits right in there in that idea of increasing competitiveness around increasing production, but also improving environmental quality. And so conservation drainage really fits right in between those two objectives. Another key reason that we're heavily invested in advancing conservation drainage is if we look at what the science assessment from the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy tells us is that, short of land use conversion, a lot of these edge of field conservation drainage practices are really some of our highest performing practices. And so as we try and reach in Iowa our 41% reduction goal on the non-point source side, at least within the drained landscape, these edge of field and other conservation drainage practices are going to be a key component of trying to reach that goal. The other piece of that is the economic efficiency of these practices, and so this is a figure that comes out of the 10 Ways publication, but is based on some of Laura Christianson's work when she was a PhD student at Iowa State, looking at the economics of these practices. And so when we think about public investment in these practices, which we think is going to take a considerable amount of public investment to get these practices implemented, return on investment is going to be greatest for some of these conservation drainage practices. So again, in the drain landscapes, which is a large part of Iowa crop production, these conservation drainage practices are going to be critical to that. And so then if we look at what we're doing as an association around trying to advance these practices, and again kind of focusing particularly on education and outreach, a number of different efforts that we've got going. Obviously we all know that oftentimes it's those one-on-one interactions that spur the most change. And so one of the things we do as far as a one-on-one type of communication is we work with volunteers that will allow us to sample their drainage outlets and then include those as part of our tile water monitoring program. And so each one of our participants then gets a summary of the results then from that year of sampling. And so one, it takes away some of the abstractness of water quality that it's easy to blame it on someone else or to not necessarily know what's leading to high levels in the streams or waterways, but when you see what's actually coming out of your outlet, then it becomes more real. And so it's a good chance for us to have that conversation with our participants about what the results mean and what that may mean for changes they may want to make in management or changes they may make in adding additional conservation practices. And so in addition to those results, then we'll give them some management recommendations of things they may want to look at to improve their environmental performance in addition to their agronomic performance. Another thing we're heavily involved with is watershed planning and working with watershed groups. And so in addition to developing watershed plans, we work with a number of different watershed groups, and particularly on education and outreach around what are the project opportunities, and particularly on these edge of field practices, jumping through the hoops to get cost share is a stumbling block. And so we develop the materials around how they work through that process to get the cost share. Reporting to our members and partners, again, conservation drainage is a key component of that, and so that's been featured in each one of our annual reports over the last few years. Also working with policymakers, and again, trying to impress the importance of these edge of field practices and having funding in place, sustainable funding, so that we can actually implement those practices, particularly since these practices are ones that really don't have an economic return for the farmer. And so again, having that public investment piece is a key component of getting those implemented. Number of communication pieces that we send out, and so kind of the quick hitting, frequent communication, our e-newsletters. So the Research Advance focus more on what we're doing within ISA research, but then e-weekly is more the general one, but that goes out to the folks that we have email addresses for, or the ones that have signed up particularly for Advance. And so again, ways that we can get quick communication out on updates on what's going on with conservation drainage and these practices and what we're doing. Then to reach the masses, and despite their questionable choice in cover models, the Iowa Soybean Review is one that goes out to every soybean farmer within the state. So again, reaches about 40,000 farmers. One of those each year is solely directed to conservation. Some of those conservation articles will end up in other issues as well. But this most recent one focused on issues of scaling up the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. And then also looking at trying to work with some of our farmer champions, the ones that have been the early adopters of these conservation drainage practices, and getting them to tell their stories. And so working with visual stories and using video to get those stories out to other farmers and other partners, and then also audio stories. And so we've got a new podcast series, and so a few of those episodes have featured some of our farmer champions that have been working on conservation drainage and implementing those practices into their operations. Then we've also got our ISA Research Conference, another outlet to be able to reach folks, and so it attracts about 400 folks each year. And for instance, this last year, then we brought in several folks from Transforming Drainage. So in addition to some of the work we're doing in Iowa, we could highlight some of the work that's going on in the neighboring states. And so we had folks from Minnesota and Missouri, as well as folks from Indiana that came in. And then working on trying to fill some of the education and knowledge gaps we've got around these practices. Again, that's one of the key stumbling blocks is just getting folks to understand these, so that they, once they understand them, then they're more willing to adopt them, and then getting knowledgeable watershed coordinators and knowledgeable contractors that can actually get those implemented. And so with that, then I'm happy to turn it over back to Rebecca, and hopefully we've got some questions we can address.
Yes, thank you. And I love the Spilling the Beans, the title of that podcast series. That's great, Chris. So thank you so much for those presentations, and we'll go ahead and get to questions now. So I think the first question was from Jerry Nepple, and I'm scrolling back to find it, and it is right here. Okay. When recycling the drainage water in the Midwest, is there any concern with salt buildup in the soil like in western states? And I think any of you can go ahead and take that. And remember to use the talk button.
I can take that one if you want. Yeah, I think the answer is probably not, because there's going to be, again, times of the year where we are operating that in conventional drainage mode, and so we are going to have those periods where we are flushing water down through the root zone, and so then hopefully flushing those salts out with it. It would be something where, as we get more folks looking at this, and as we continue on with the research, doing some testing of that water in the pond as we're using it, so that we do have some idea what that salt balance is. And so it's something we need to keep an eye on, but I think, again, because the weather conditions are different than they are in out west, we are going to have opportunities to flush those salts out of the root zone, so we don't anticipate that it should be an issue.
Great, thank you. And Laura or Jane, anything to add there?
No, I think it's great. In North Dakota, they do have some issues with the soil, but it's true on the whole, we are flushing so much water through. No, Chris did a great job.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question is from D. Carlson. What are the primary factors driving the expansion of tile-drained acres?
Chris, do you want to speak to that one, or should I try?
Well, I can take a stab at it to start with, and you can fill in the gaps. Certainly $7 corn a few years ago was a key driver, and then also tax implications of wanting to be able to depreciate those investments. So high commodity prices was a key driver. The other, particularly in South Dakota, North Dakota, northwest Minnesota, some of those areas, was changes we've seen in weather patterns too, that we're just wetter than we had been historically. And so we particularly large increases in fall precipitation, and so we were filling up the soil profile in the fall, and then once we melted snow in the spring, there wasn't a lot of place for that water to go, and so it was creating a lot of drainage issues. And so, again, with high commodity prices, there was that incentive to be able to improve the drainage. The other was then increasing land prices, and so maybe in the past you bought some more land as a way to try and increase production. Once land prices skyrocketed, then that became prohibitive, and so improving drainage on ground you already operated was a way to deal with that.
And I'll weigh in just a second on that question too. The phrase driving the expansion of tile drain acres kind of hits a note with me, because there's really only a few places where new tile drainage systems are being installed. For example, the Dakotas and the Red River Valley up north, and then also Missouri, and some states down south. But the areas like Illinois, Iowa, parts of Indiana, we've been drained for 150 years. And so in our area, where we see big semis of tile drains rolling down the highway, a lot of that tile is going to places that has historically, or fields that has historically been drained, but they're now the drainage infrastructure is being updated, and so those historically drained fields are being drained more intensively. And so the term expansion of tile drain acres, yeah, we have new acres coming under tile drainage every year in certain parts of the north central region, but a lot of the tile that's going in is going in to make drainage systems, existing systems, more intensive. And I think that's just a really interesting kind of nuance about new drainage.
Great, thanks to you. Thanks to you both. We'll move on to our next question, which is from Lisa Duranchek, and she has a number of good questions here. First, how long have the projects on drainage, water storage, and recycling been assessed? I'm just going to go through all the questions that she has here, and you can take them on together. The next question she has are, what are the trends in the quality of water over time with reuse? And she's raising the question about other constituents that may be building up in that water, and potential concern about, we address salt buildup, but other things that are in the water that may be building up with continued reuse of that water.
Well, these are great questions, Lisa. Good to see them. And we don't have enough answers by any means. None of the projects on drainage water recycling, that's the newest practice, the one that we're really trying to, it's sort of out there, it's the most innovative, and it's only been implemented in a few places. So certainly there's not nearly enough research. So, and the water quality of the water itself is one thing that more work needs to be done on, not because it will build up year after year so much, but are the pesticides that are applied maybe to corn still going to be there if you applied it on soybeans, or is there any questions like that? Bacteria issues, I mean, certainly this water will not be clean. So those are interesting and important issues to research, and more needs to be done. But I especially want to make clear that this practice is very new, and what we feel like is the most important need right now is just to get a few more examples on the ground so that we can be collecting the data needed. Even in the sites that I presented in Ohio and Missouri, where they've got great data on the yield improvements, they don't have good data on the load reductions downstream. So there's a few that have gone in recently that will start to give us data on that. In the absence of measured data, we are making estimates based on what we know is happening, but this is something that more field data is badly needed, and so we keep writing proposals to try and keep getting more sites in. And another thing that we do with this project is actively go after, whenever we hear about anybody who's got something like this in, see if we can engage them in the network, so at least what's being learned at one system can be shared across the network. The extension publication was written with, I think there's 10 authors, and we all shared what we know, what we think we know, sort of the state of the art right now, but it's by no means something that we have the answers that we need.
Thank you, Jane. So certainly recognizing these are important issues and that we're working to figure them out to see where these practices can be used and where there might be some concerns. Ali Miyagi has our next question: is a sub-irrigation practice effective on I assume he's suggesting effective on the reduction of nitrogen levels in controlled drainage.
Anybody want to speak on that one?
I can take it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say that yeah, in essence, sub-irrigation is just an extension of controlled drainage or drainage water management, and so to make the sub-irrigation work, you're going to be eliminating or reducing the outflow at times of the year so you can put water back into the system. And so by, again, reducing that overall outflow from the system, you're reducing the nitrate load that would go with it. And so how effective it is going to depend on management, same as it would be with controlled drainage, but kind of the same impact that controlled drainage would have by just extending that with sub-irrigation. You're still reducing the overall nitrate load that would leave the system.
Great, thank you. And Laura, Jane, anything to add there?
Nope, I think that's good.
Okay. Next question is from Doug Peterson. Where can we find the research paper with the cost data comparing bioreactors to cover crops?
Yep, I'll take that one. So I just chatted a link, Doug. That's a great question. A link to our paper that we did in Iowa back in 2011. I don't know if that paper is available open access, so if you're not at a university, you might not be able to access the paper. So if you can't, just email chris@illinois.edu. I'll send you a copy of that paper. And the economic stuff is also available in that 10 Ways booklet. It's kind of boiled down a little bit in the booklet, but that paper is an oldie but a goodie for sure.
Great, thanks, Laura. And question for Jane: where can people go to see transforming drainage projects? Do you post field days, as events? How can we get to see these things?
Well, this is a very timely question because we just realized we started a new tab on the Transforming Drainage website that's called Events, and we are going to make a more conscious effort to get field days all across the region on there. We're planning one here in June, and so that was the impetus for making sure that we post it. Ben Reinhardt, who's the project manager, posts on Twitter, and both of my co-presenters here, Chris and Laura, are both pretty active on Twitter and put a lot of great stuff out there, so you might see it that way too. I'm not so great myself, but it's a great question, and we'll try to be more active with social media, I think, and certainly the website to show where they are across the region.
Great, thank you. And one of our Brians, we have a number of Brians on the line today, but Brian 2 says, what is the scale, acres and pond size on some of the water recycling projects? How many inch equivalents are able to be put on later in the season in some of those projects? And he's just wanting to understand the economics of a new practice like water recycling.
Well, let me start with that one, and Chris might want to add about the inches and what we know about that. But this is extremely important, and so we're just, when I talked about the decision support tools, this is one that's under active development. In the next few weeks, I expect to have a prototype, and we will be presenting on this at the Soil and Water Conservation Society meeting and at American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers this summer, right? So with a lot of examples, that's our goal, to be able to say, you know, here's what size you could reasonably do. As a very rough estimate, the pond would need to be 5 to 10% of the size of the irrigated area, something along those lines. So, if you know, some people are shocked, and you know, they in horror they say, "Well, I can't take land out of production," but yet the economics may still be there if the yield increase is sufficient, right? If you take you know, 5% out of your land out of production, but the yield can increase by 10%, you could still be ahead. So a lot of economics still need to be done. But for what is certainly true is these ponds need to be very large. This is not a 1-acre pond that you're going to store water for a 160-acre field or anything like that. They need to be very large ponds. So a lot of times we think about and invite everyone else to think about, where in our landscape are there places where you might be able to store a reasonable amount of water? So whether it's borrow pits for new highway construction, or you know, land that's not prime farmland, or you know, we certainly need to think of places in the landscape that may not be the most profitable areas where a pond could be there. As far as the amount of irrigation, we're thinking that you would be able to add maybe 3-4 inches, not the total amount of irrigation that an irrigator might use if that's their only source of water, but this would be supplemental irrigation. So that's some background on the pond size. Chris, do you want to say any more?
Sure. I just echo that it's an important question, and one that needs some more work. And so, you know, it's something I've been doing a little bit of work and looking in Iowa. Yebbe Kjarsgaard up with Minnesota Department of Ag's been looking some at Minnesota, but we've got an effort within the Transforming Drainage Project to look at this on a regional basis to really get at what's the irrigation requirement, or what's the potential need for supplemental irrigation water, and then what's the potential that we could supply with recycled drainage water, and then take the next steps to then, okay, now that we've got that, what's the yield impact of that, so that we can actually get to the economics around that. And so you know, I think where we've seen it in Iowa, at least so far, has been on some higher value crops, whether it's popcorn or seed corn. And so, you know, if we're going to get it to more standard corn and soybean production, figuring out some of those economic questions is going to be key to that. And so, it's work in progress, but it looks like, you know, for say 1 to 2 inches, it's going to be pretty tough to pencil out. But if we can come up with 3, 4, 5 inches in key years, that has a big yield impact, then maybe that does pencil out as making economic sense. But that's I guess why we're doing the research.
Great, thanks to you both. And we're going to see if we can zip through these last couple questions here before the end of our time. What kind of topography is most conducive to the drainage recycling system? And this question is from Greg Wandry.
I guess I'll jump in with that, because we are actively thinking about that one too. Certainly ponds that can be built as embankment ponds, where you build a dam and that holds the water up, are less expensive. There's less earth to move than if you have to excavate the entire pond. However, the ponds I've seen in Michigan, that was very striking, they are simply excavating large areas out of the field, building up with the bank, and so you have a pond that's above the field itself, and it's completely on flat fields. So both are possible. It'll all be a question of economics.
And I guess I'll just add that some of that will depend then on the choice of irrigation system as well. That if you're trying to recycle through a sub-irrigation system, that's going to be most conducive to pretty flat topography. But if you're using a center pivot, that opens up additional areas that with a little more topography that would be suitable then.
But can I just add again, I really invite everyone to consider, because I was trying to think how to paint the picture of a landscape where we no longer just have vast expanses of corn and soybean, but we have vast expanses with ponds in them. It would be a very different kind of landscape, but a more resilient and more sustainable landscape. So there's not an obvious path to get there. We certainly can't say now that we're recommending this practice. But just as things have changed dramatically with urban stormwater, I invite everyone to think about how it could change in the agricultural world to have ponds where people have not thought about having them for a very long time.
Well, I would love to end with that vision, but hold that thought, and we're going to get to David Kringan's question here. Are benefits of cover crops, increased organic matter, etc., considered when comparing to the economics of drainage?
And that would be for you, Laura.
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. Benefits of cover crops. So in the economic analysis, we did not consider any sort of soil health benefit over the long term. Back when we were doing the analysis, that work was really, I would say the soil health movement was really just starting back about 5 years ago, and so we didn't include that because we felt like the results on that were just not enough results, maybe too variable at that point. We did include for cost of certain practices if there was a yield penalty or a yield benefit to corn. So we did try to include those costs, and then we also included things like opportunity costs for land taken out of production. But no, those numbers could definitely be updated in the future if we could put a good value on the, a good economic value on soil health benefits. I think that'd be an interesting place to take those numbers. But no, as for now, we didn't include them. Good question.
Sounds like another oh, go ahead, Chris.
And just real quickly, I think it is easy to look at that figure and have some questions. I think another key important part of that is it's really just looking at what's the cost per pound of nitrogen removed, and so when you look at a practice like cover crops, there's a number of other benefits beyond just the nitrogen removal. And so for an individual producer considering cover crops, they need to take into account those other benefits, potentially other costs too, in that equation. But if you're looking at a public investment for trying to reduce nitrate, then it really is just important what is the cost per pound of nitrogen removed. So I think there's some opportunities to lower that cost on cover crops, and I think probably is already a little lower than what was shown there, but opportunities to lower it even more. But from a public investment standpoint, it's still going to be tough to get to the point where it's as economically efficient as the edge of field practices purely for nitrogen removal.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters. You can hear there's a lot going on right now in terms of rethinking drainage and transforming drainage, and interest in forming a network of thinkers and practitioners from a diversity of perspectives. So I hope this has given everyone some additional information to work with, and you have an invitation, I think, from our presenters to contact them and to explore any additional ideas that you have. It's going to take a lot of minds and a lot of different experiences to work through where we're headed next with drainage. So we really appreciate you participating in this conversation with us. Again, thanks to our presenters for a great job today. You can visit this archived webinar or send it to people that you think might be interested. We should have it up in a week or so. That's at northcentralwater.org or learn.extension.org. And our next webinar for the North Central Region Water Network will be coming up on May 17th, again at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned for that, and thanks again for joining us today. Have a good day.